Hello, Refuge Church. Pastor Craig here. Obviously, I'm not with you today. God has called me to go and preach today at a homecoming service at a church my dad used to be at. But today I'm super excited that my brother Chris is here today to share with you not only a powerful testimony, but a powerful message that I believe you're going to be extremely encouraged by. So I just ask as he comes up that you would listen with an open heart and an open mind and expect God to speak through him. I'll talk with you soon. God bless.
So one of my goals today is to be able to give you guys, some bullet points, some things you can take home with you and you can refer back to. Craig made sure to remind me that I needed some bullets, but I loved that because sometimes you can go hear somebody share a story and you're like, man, I don't know what I got from it, but I felt good about it. And so I want you to feel good about it, but I also want you to have some bullets that you can take with you. So that's one of the main purpose I'm here, but it's also one other reason, because I promised my dad before he passed away that I would stay in the process of telling my story. And so that's the other reason I'm here. The irony of me being here today on November the 5th is not lost on me. In November 3rd, 1989, we ended up having what to me was a pivotal experience with my aunt, my mom's sister. She was 30 years old. I was very close with my aunt and uncle, and they were in church all the time and serving and loving people, and they had 2 kids. And so my aunt was dying of melanoma cancer. And so I had been to the hospital the week before this. And so there was a process going on that I didn't even know in my spirit, which was I'm watching what my family does and people that say they love God and serve God and they're doing, but I'm watching to see how it turns out. You know what I mean? Like, hey, if I sign up for this, even at 17 years old, I'm thinking to myself, as a pastor's kid, because, you hear a lot of the truth and what we should live our lives as. But I'm thinking, okay, is God going to heal her? Because I had another family member that was also struggling. And I can tell you, if I'm being honest about where I was at that point in time, I was talking to God and saying, good and well, that person, they actually probably deserve what they're getting. And that's hard to say out loud. I don't know if I've actually ever said that before. So I began to bargain with God, and some things happened over several years. But so my aunt, on that day that I saw her in the hospital, she had a stroke. She had cancer on her brain. She could not talk. All she could do was look at you. She turned and looked over at me, and her eyes just staring. And so I see her as a person that laughed and loved life and was just enjoyable to be around. I shared earlier that she's the one who taught me the song, Shake Your Booty. I can still see her jamming on the piano, shake, shake. So just joy, just love, genuine love. And my family's like that. It's something there. I don't know. It matters to me. So at 17 years old, I had seen her in the hospital. I couldn't get the words out to say to her. We weren't talking. If we would have been talking, that would have been one thing. But I couldn't even tell her that I love her and thank her for the impact, that she had made on my life. So it's a Friday, November 3rd, 1989. I know it's that day because I had a football game. And I played ball. I was a captain of the football team. I loved playing football. I loved being a leader. I loved being on the field. I mean, I was school spirited. I mean, you probably tell how animated I am. Like I have energy to deliver. And so playing football was really good for me. So I walked to my locker. I'm at school, high school, put my books in my locker. I closed the door, and I hear my Aunt Brenda, who was married to my uncle, that was my dad's brother, and she says, "Shug." And as soon as she says "Shug," I knew what happened. She said, "Aunt Pam went home." So I turned around. I closed in my mind. Everything shut down. The noise, being able to play ball, just was such a safe place for me. I was pretty good. I had opportunities to just do things that you love. When I practiced hard. I played hard. I just had that oomph to go and do it. And so I just put my books in my locker. She says, "Aunt Pam's gone home." Now, Aunt Pam was 30 years old. She had 2 kids that were super young. And she was serving God. She was in church all the time. She was volunteering. How do you think that impacted my view of God? Like, yeah, you read that it rains and the sun shines on the good and the bad, but you don't really believe that about God most times. At least I didn't, especially not at 17 years old. It's like, all right, well, man, if I serve, so you telling me that if I serve God, it can turn out like this. If I serve myself, it can turn out like this. I mean, what's the benefit? And I think we all face that at different times. But that shaped how I viewed God, how I talked with him. I just remember the lasting image, it was this day, Sunday, 1989. We were graveside, and then my uncle had my younger nephew in one arm and his daughter's hand. And right before they lowered the casket down, he put his hand on there and just rubbed it. And I knew how much he loved her. Man, I was so mad at God. I was so mad. Because here's a person that could have made, according to you, a really big impact. And she did. But why would he take her? That became a lot of how I viewed God. Man, I really did want to live for God. Let me just say briefly, I didn't share this earlier. In years 1 to 7, and my best friend Derek's here today, I tell him this all the time. The most important thing you can do right now is love your wife and be a dad. His kids are younger. My kids are older. Years 1 through 7 shape everything about you. When I was 1 through 7, my mom and dad were on their face trying to seek God and give themselves to him in ministry. And that energy washed over me 7 years. My dad was a pastor forever, 47 years, Mom? Is that right? Before he retired. He's home with the Lord now. So that energy there to be something more than just, hey, I'm getting mine, it is within me. I cannot wake up without it. So it's really hard to get up and feel like I can't really trust God with the hard things because the bad stuff that could happen probably has happened. What am I going to do with that? My aunt had a conversation with my dad. She said, "Stephen, do you think God can heal me?" I wasn't there for it. I heard it. But in my mind, that was a question of, God, are you going to be God? Are you going to be the little guy that we talk about, who we sing some songs about, or are you going to show up and be real? And at that moment, he did not show up how I wanted him to show up. I had a lot of distrust for him. Those times shape how we approach not just our relationship with God, but how much of ourselves we're going to give to him, how much we're going to walk in his word, how much we're going to walk in his ways. And we're going to watch a video in a second, but we just absorb stuff all the time from TV, internet, social media, other people who tell us what God's word says, but we aren't reading it ourselves, or a half-truth like Satan threw on Jesus when he was tempting him out in the wilderness. Like these things, they're just around us all the time. So when we hear, be on guard, be ready, a lot of that is centered around your belief and your view of God. In so many ways, we have to treat our view and views of God like ice that's frozen over a pond. Like, test those things that we believe, whether they're going to hold up or not, because you might fall in, and it's pretty cold, when you're out by yourself, and you're like, God, okay, I've got all these crazy things going on, and I don't know what to do with it. What you're believing or misbelieving about God today in this moment in time will have a radical impact on you. So I talked with Craig, and one of the things that I think a lot of us deal with is something that is a term that I recently learned about in the last month or so, but it's something that, I think resonates with us all. It's called ambiguous grief. And it's grief that we don't talk about, is grief that we are kind of like lost about. We don't know how to interact over it. We should ourselves, like, hey, I shouldn't feel this way about that, or I got all these other things going on. And there's a part of that pain that comes with grief that helps shape our misbeliefs about God, if that makes sense. For me, I'm going to share a little bit of my story in a minute about the ways that my grief and my pain led me down some really crazy and difficult roads. So I, for whatever reason, a few months ago was talking to Craig about the title of the service being God, Where Are You? And had I been thinking at the time, I just knew so many people struggle with God, where are you? There's horrible news everywhere. There's people constantly losing people in their family. There's people constantly diagnosed with sickness. There's financial problems. We won't even get into the political realm at all. Like our country, and remember, our country is at the top. We are like living high on the hog compared to the rest of the world. And it's a train wreck. People are so lost in grief because it's not turning out the way that they wanted it to. I have a conversation with my daughter scheduled every single week. On Thursday at some point, we have a conversation. The last 4 weeks, we've had a conversation about how much disservice Disney has done to us. How much disservice, not just like, but our families, like how, romance is supposed to work. And she's right when she brought this up. She's been talking about this for a couple years, but I'm just like, that has shaped us. Well, in 2010, my wife of 14 years brought my kids, Lydia and Noah, into our bedroom and sat them on our bed. And she said, kids, just as a matter of fact, I was getting ready for work. Kids, I asked Daddy to move out, and we're getting a divorce because he doesn't love Mommy anymore. My kids immediately burst into tears. My son's wailing, crying. I can still hear the pain and the no. He literally, no, red face, turned over, crying uncontrollably. I'm supposed to be at work in half an hour. Anything that we had taught him or that he had been exposed to about God was completely thrown straight out the window in the middle of the pain that he had just experienced, and then the grief that he still carries even at 24 years old today because of going through that. And I share that because I know that some of us here today have things that we think we're supposed to be over. And we carry grief and the pain of life not working out the way we wanted it to. And it impedes our view and our relationship with God. So this happens. 4 lives turned upside down. Wheels come off our relationship. The next few months are arguments. We're just at each other. We're trying to figure out finances. It was terrible. I have sought forgiveness multiple times from my children for the things that I said, and I was very limited in things I said at times. But I learned that I helped screw up their view of God with the way I approach things. I was sleeping on couches, finding a new place to live. But the biggest part is that I didn't realize I was in grief mode. I had just lost what was supposed to be the most important relationship. And the context of being a husband and a dad with my children. And I can't explain to you the hollowness that comes, like, so many of us have gone through that now in these days. Even if it's just an important relationship, but that relationship never being the same and being broken into a million pieces. I would pick my kids up every week. We go have hangout time. And I would take them to the gas station. We'd go pick up some coffee or hot chocolate. And then we'd go to the mall in Oviedo, right outside of Orlando. We'd go to the Sears and go to the second floor garden center. And we would sit in the outdoor garden furniture. There were chairs and, like the outdoor couches or whatever and tables. And so we would sit. And to them, they were getting time with Daddy, and they didn't have to hear fighting at home anymore. To me, I thought, wow, this is what my life has come to? I can't even see time with my kids except for at Sears and used to be Roebuck and go have coffee time. It radically affected my view of whether I believed God could ever use me again. So the backdrop to that is that I spent almost a decade as an ordained minister working for a national organization that planted churches and helped raise leaders up to impact the world. And now I'm impacting Sears and Roebuck coffee time with my kids, who I don't know if they're ever going to be the same or not. I shared after the first service with someone that is struggling with a child. I had a chance to baptize my son with the pastor from the church that we went to. And I still have this picture. I have this guy's memorial service in my Bible. He's like 10 years younger than me. One day he resigned from church. He had been having an affair. And his dad was known not just in Orlando, but nationally. His dad was a counselor that worked with multiple presidents. I think he had done consults with 6 different presidents during his time of pastoring, 40 plus years. And now his son is struggling. I found a lot of my story in his story. But his name was Isaac. So Isaac, he resigned, was having an affair. His view of God was massively skewed. But if you walked up to him at church and you talked to him, he would make you feel like you want to go find Jesus, the Jesus that you read about. He was super gifted. I mean, so gifted. I still have a massive love for him and the way he made the gospel relevant to people. So my son is baptized, and then several years later, Isaac took his life. He drank half a bottle of Wild Turkey. He was grieving the loss of a marriage, what was going on with his kids, the shame he brought on his family. If you don't think that will make you stop and ask, because I did, God, where are you, man? This man, we had NBA stars and all kind of people coming to our church, and I mean, they were walking in humility, not like, red carpet stuff. These people were seeking, and they wanted to know God. And I knew I wanted to know God. But in the middle of that, it started becoming obvious that, it's not always just that easy. So I want to get to our first point. Because in these stories, I know that when we start feeling hopeless, we start feeling like God's not present. So the absence of hope always feels like God is not present. And if the example was Jesus Christ himself hanging on a tree and saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where have you gone? Then I think the rest of us can be honest enough to admit that when we're going through those things and we don't feel the hope, that it would only be the next right thing to say, God, where are you? And there's no shame in that. Pain finances, work, marriage, raising kids. Things don't happen as planned. Life is just like starting to fade out of you. Our view of God affects how we approach those things. So I want to share a verse, Matthew 9:36, that has been one of my life verses that I have had to crawl back into multiple times. And Matthew says, when he saw the multitudes, Jesus, he was moved with compassion for them because they were weary and scattered like sheep, having no shepherd. We could paraphrase that and say, like us, not knowing what the heck to do in our lives when all the stuff's hitting the fan, and where do we go? The point of sharing that verse is that when we're in that darkness and we don't know what to do, stepping back and remembering that if Jesus is looking out through the eyes of the Father at us, it matters to him when we're going through these dark things. It matters how we approach them. It matters not just to get it right, but for his desperate love for us. In 2016, I was kidnapped. 2 people showed up at my house. One had a baseball bat. And they said, you're coming with us. And I was like super confused, a little bit shaken up with what was going on, but I kind of half cared because I had spent a good portion of the night sipping from my vodka bottle that I had stuffed in the mattress of my bed. And so even that morning, I had already had a couple visits, with my friend. I call it liquid hope. So the weight of somebody telling me that I'm going with them and they're kidnapping me and all this stuff, it was just more confusing than it was heavy. It set in later. But as my kidnappers, my dad and my brother, cornered me, it became apparent that I had no choice, either to hurt them and get away temporarily, or I was going with them. And my second wife had already told me she was leaving me. She had already left me once. She was having dialogues and interactions with other people. I don't have anything that I can prove other than the wife of one of the people she was talking with called me and said, I've been trying to get your wife to stop talking to my husband for 6 months. And we were driving to a counseling appointment. So here I am, the last thing I experienced in Florida before I moved here in 2016 are my 2 kids who showed up at the hotel where my dad and brother were staying, and they said, Daddy, we love you. And tears pouring down their face. Because they had already seen the train wreck of alcohol in my life. And they probably thought they might not ever see me again because of how bad it had gotten. After I moved here, I got a voicemail from my daughter. She left for me and she said, hey, Daddy, I'm at work. I saw a car. And for a minute, I thought it was you. I thought you were back home. That sounds sad, but you have no idea how bad it feels as a parent to know that the impact of your life has caused this in your child's life. I am super close with my daughter now, thank God. But here I am, a useless drunk, 2 failed marriages, lost job, and a life that made no sense to me because previously, 10 years earlier, I was involved in helping see change the world. I was involved in planting churches and sharing. And that scares me even now because I know that I'm a human being and I could fall away at any given time. My foundational belief of God was he's not good. And so why would I really trust him if he's not present and now I have all the background information to prove that he's not going to be doing what I believed that he wasn't going to do? A few months later, after getting kidnapped, my dad and brother would have said a little differently, but it felt like kidnapping to me. That changed the trajectory of my life. And a few months later, I was sitting with my brother, and he had driven me to a detox facility, and we're talking, and he had a half bottle of Listerine, and I was like, hey, man, you mind if I have some of your Listerine? He goes, yeah, no, go ahead. Y'all have seen Craig's face and how he, animated he is. So I turned up his half bottle of Listerine, I drank the whole thing, and I put it back in the console, and he looked at me like, what in the world did you just do? But I had been down this road before, in the throes of alcohol and having to go through a detox and what your body goes through. And so if you're here today and you struggle, I met somebody this morning in tears that said to me, it still has me. And you know what? If you're here today and it still has you, don't give up. Don't stop trusting and seeking and hoping, because I resonate with the tears of not being able to let go of what I thought I was just using as a crutch. So I explained to Craig withdrawals and all that stuff best I could, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm off into the behavioral center to go detox and try to figure out, my life, because nothing really was making sense. But Craig kept saying these things to me, and he goes, man, it seems like you got a lot of grief. And I'm like, grief? What are you talking? I just didn't understand where he was coming from with it at that time, because I just thought, man, nothing's working out the way I want it to. I tried to do this and that, but he was right. The reason that nothing was working out is because I had massive grief that all the way back to my Aunt Pam, stack upon stack of all these times that God let me down. And so now I keep a really, really, really short account with God, because if I don't know where I could end up being. I have to stop and say, I don't know exactly what you're doing right now. So I know in a room this size, there are people struggling with marriages, secrets, probably relationship stuff that, let's be honest, nobody wants to talk about and bring that to light. But I just want to encourage you to find a way to talk about it and bring it to light. It's a part of the process of seeking, even though it feels like 10,000 pounds. Our second point is how you deal with life's griefs. Make a life-altering difference. So for me, with my grief and my trying to get away from the pain, I'm pursuing, until I had a legitimate solution, I truthfully thought that vodka could help me. Because it did. It took away the lack of hope that I had. And so dealing with life's griefs, now most of us probably aren't going to say oh yeah, I struggle with vodka. But there's usually something else, some attachment, something that gets put in place that becomes the go-to thing while we figure out the other thing. And then it turns to be something that's negative or not healthy. So I'm at this behavioral center. And I can honestly say, at that point in my life, I had not ever seriously thought about harming myself. I had had times where I'm just I can't deal with this anymore. I want out of it. I don't know how to get out of it. And when you're in a hopeless place, it can feel like the only way out of that is to be out of here. And that's a lie. But I felt that. So I'm at this behavioral center, confused. I was detoxing for a few days there, and this verse kept coming to my head, Romans 7:15, that I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And I'm like, well, this sums up my whole life right here. Maybe not my whole life, but the last, number of years. The stuff I really want to do, the stuff I really want to be about, the things that I'm passionate about, those are all foregone. I've gone through 2 divorces. I've got a drinking problem. My kids are far away. We all know what it feels like to have all of those things that make us feel like we'll get to God when we can. I had a lot of those. So I sat there on a cold tile floor, and I'm thinking, well, really, what are the options? Because at this point, I'd already been to a couple different treatment centers. I had detoxed a number of times. And I'm like, I've tried everything. I had worked with sponsors. I had done the, 12-step thing. I had done Celebrate Recovery, which I wasn't recovering, so I wasn't celebrating. I mean, all the things. I'm a very smart aleck person. I'm very sarcastic. So I think God may put that in me. I'm not sure. My wife might say differently. But I'm sitting on the floor, and I'm praying, and I'm crying, and I had the bed sheet, and I'm twisting it, like almost making a rope out of it. And I think what I realized is that, I was probably trying to test God, but in my mind, I was also thinking, like, am I really going to do this? Because I was so tired of fighting and so tired of getting up. When I turned in here today, the first memory that came up for me was after I moved back here. I sat in that McDonald's while the first service went on, obviously quite a few years ago, and I drank a tall boy, whatever it was. And then some girl comes and sits down and starts telling me she has an alcohol problem. I mean, the irony of that. Then I come to church, and I'm thinking, okay, that's real great. Like, I wasn't hammered, but that's what I said to myself. Like, you got to get hammered to go to church. I mean, in reality, I probably thought that because I didn't necessarily want to be around happy, joyous people when my life's a dumpster fire. So, anyway, that is not what I got when I came in here. The hugs and the love and knowing the prayers that were going up for me, they were awesome. So I sat there, and I started realizing that maybe my view of God wasn't right. Or maybe my view of God was like 3/4 right, or maybe whatever percentage it was. But I knew that whatever it was wasn't helping me out where I was at that point in time. So I started talking to God, and our next point is no matter where life finds you, always be found seeking. So on that floor, I started talking through a promise that I've kept, because that wasn't my last time drinking. I had conversations with my bride, my third wife, in some of the darkest times about maybe it would just be better if I just, got the gun out of totally just saying things that I felt. I didn't necessarily mean that. She didn't know that. There is a bottom so low that we have the potential of going to, that I know a lot of people might say, well, gosh, I'm glad I haven't been that place. But I know that you're here today, and that waits on you, because it's everywhere. Refuge is a place of hope. I just want to encourage you that no matter what you're doing, take the time to wrestle through whether or not you're going to keep trying. That's the only promise I made. My wife has a video that she shot of me. And I didn't go off the rails or anything, but, I had drank, and she started asking me questions, and I said, video it, take it. And I looked at her, and I said, you know what? I'm sorry that I do this. I don't want to do this. She's been through a lot of things with me early on in our relationship. I told her, I said, the one thing I can tell you is that I'll get back up and I'll keep seeking. I will always keep fighting. And I have done that. So one day I'm driving back from somewhere, probably a meeting or something with a therapist, and I get an email, and it's the breakthrough email that I need. Like, I needed to hear this thing so bad that I had to pull off the road at the Bilo in Somerville off Old Trolley Road and Bacon's Bridge, and I had to sit there for 90 minutes, bawling my eyes out and wrestling with God. Like, wrestling with God. Because he didn't need to tell me all the things I had done wrong or all the ways I didn't measure up. I mean, I already knew that. I had the list in my head. I could disqualify my own self. But he opened me up and he brought me to this point of, if you will just always stay seeking, if you will just, even when it doesn't make sense, if you will always stay seeking, that's my will for you. So I'm like, okay, well, that's God's will for my life. So I go and start doing a Bible study over that, and I start realizing that that's the measurement. That's the tool I can use every single day of my life to know, regardless of how things feel, regardless if it's good or if it's bad or if it worked out the way I want to, but if I'm seeking. So I didn't tell this story earlier this morning. So my mom and dad, they kept seeking for me. And they pulled me out of some things. My dad showed up to pick me up one time, and all I can remember is thinking, like, I know this crushes him. I know it does. I can't do anything about it. What my dad showed me, and my mom, is that there's no place that's too far for them to reach and keep fighting and pushing. And when I can't seek, they seek for me. They seek with me. Yesterday, I had a Facebook picture pop up, a memory. I'm not on Facebook as much as I used to be. So it's a selfie picture of me and my wife. My head's all shaved. Only she and I know where that picture was taken. But I know we were sitting on a swing at a recovery center, and she was doing the seeking to be there with me and us figure out how God could right the ship. That's one of my favorite pictures. You know, Matthew 7:7 tells us that we should keep on asking and we'll receive. We should keep on seeking and we'll find, keep knocking. And then right after verse 8, it talks about being parents, and if your kids ask you for a loaf of bread, are you going to turn around and give them a stone instead? Or if they ask for a fish, give them a snake. You know, there's a reason that's there, because God knows that we have a serious problem with our view of him. And in the beginning, you know, the PR team for Adam and Eve and all the stuff that everybody did in the Old Testament didn't set a really good example most times. But it did set a really good example, because those pages are chocked full of people who are broken to the core, that God reached down and pulled them out, repurposed them, refilled them with hope again, and they got back up. And just like David, who, if you only heard the side of the stories of all the crazy stuff he did, God said, here's a man after my own heart. What? Like, really? Because, yeah, he slayed Goliath, but he also took another man's wife and then started killing people and crazy stuff. God knows where we're at when we're in it. Matthew 7:7, keep seeking, keep asking, keep knocking, is God's will for our life. So today, when we're talking about the things we're going through, and I mean, my gosh, if we turn the TV on for 5 minutes, we have so much stuff that you can't even tolerate it, because you're like, well, where do we even go with this? You know where I used to go with it? Like, God, where are you? Now I go with, God, will we be present in those people's lives? I mean, we have the Holocaust to look back on, and all the thousands of stories of people that were like, even in the midst of being tortured and trying to be killed, I experienced God in the middle. Like, that doesn't even make sense to most people. It can't make sense. Naturally, we can't get it. So in 2018, I started laying the foundation for this concept called Regenesis. My favorite Bible verse, my life verse, I started memorizing it when I was in school in Clemson at the church that I went to up there. It's Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world any longer, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you can test and approve what God's will is, his good, perfect, pleasing will. And so that stuck with me because I early on realized, like, I'd just really like to figure out what God wants, and then I can just go do it and not spend so much time in the prayer booth or reading the Bible, and just like give me the, I would say destructions if I wasn't at church, because that's what it turned into. Give me the instructions. And just like there was something disconnected about that relationship with him. So I started laying this foundation for Regenesis, which is now a nonprofit that we have started, and is focused on helping equip individuals and organizations to help people strategically align with their purpose, their passion, their personality, and their place, like where you live life out. I would typically call that roles. Most people, if you start asking about purpose, they want to know, like, well, what place am I going to live my purpose? Like, you have all the places that you could live your purpose right now in your life, more than likely, and work might be one of them. So we started this idea of Regenesis, and Regenesis means the state of being made new or being renewed. It's a place, just like the state that water gets in, whether it's in gas or ice or whatever, not to get a chemistry lesson going. But state is like how you are positioned and how you're set up. And so that became my Matthew 7:7, ask, seek, knock, and my Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that I can test and approve what God's will is. So now I have sideboards on whether or not I'm in God's will or not, and how I feel has nothing to do with it. And let me just tell you, there are days I am so tired of trying to seek what God wants. I'm just being honest. My wife and I recently purchased a 40-acre farm in the upstate with the dream that we've been talking about for 6, 7, whatever years, like early on in our relationship, to have a retreat center that we can do some equipping and training there and run this Regenesis program that we've put together. And I mean, every step of the way. I mean, every time I talk to my family, they're like, oh, how are things going? I mean, it's just always something to give an update on. Everywhere we've turned, this thing hasn't turned out right or the way we wanted it to. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, how many of us have stories where things didn't turn out right? Things did not come to fruition the way that we thought it would. And in our mind and our heart, we made a bargain with God, like, hey, if I do this, and we kind of think like, okay, well, God will work something out for us. And you know what? That's true. God will work something out for us according to his will and his purposes. And not having a grounding and wanting that is so hard. It's so hard to be okay with how things turn out if we aren't grounded in him and in what he has for us. And I don't know many people who can look at things the way I do and find maybe the more non-strategic things. I'm kind of like, God, this was your plan, man. This kind of didn't work out great. If I were you, we do that. We're negotiating with him. So in 2019, we created this nonprofit. And then I was working on this program called Core 4 to help people, specifically in the last 3 years, this window has been focused on helping people not just find their purpose, but discover it and walk into it and be able to understand how God's made them and how to live that out, where to live it out, that type thing. So for me, this went back to a promise that God gave me when I was sitting at the BI-LO parking lot, praying, crying, snotting up everything, windows all fogged up and crazy, because God was telling me, like, I'm doing this work and I'm inviting you to be a part of it. Everything before that felt like God has something he wants me to do. He's asking me to do it. I don't have the energy to do it. I don't have the character, whatever, you fill in the blank, like I can't do this. That moment, things began to change for me. And it was because of seeking. I'm not the best seeker. I'm a very strong-willed person. I have ideas about how God should God. You know what I mean? But the seeking gives me comfort. It really does give me comfort. And when I talked about goals, this was one that I could spend all day long talking about this because it's the most important. I mean, I'm constantly trying to hone this point in that the seeking is the secret sauce. So somewhere in 2017, Craig says to me, he starts asking me questions about my struggle with alcohol and how things got off the rails, and it was very graciously done. I'm listening to what he's asking me, and I'm like, I don't really know. Like, he's right. Like, things weren't so bad before, but I don't know what I was doing. So I began working on this, like, 4 legs of a table of life for my life, and while I'm doing it, I start realizing, like, this core 4 stuff, man, this is good. Like, and it's not me telling you or preaching at you. It's like you doing the work and discovering what your purpose is and things that you're passionate about. God took me back to when I was at Clemson. The church I went to there had these things called shape classes. And so when you became a new believer, we had a discipleship program, and then you went into shape so that you could learn about all the things that you had been through, discover your heart, like what you're really passionate about. So early on, I had this desire to see other, because it was given to me. So we have this 40-acre property that we've named Sacred Creek. We don't really even have access to the creek yet because there's so many briars trying to get to it. I've been to it twice. And we don't have a retreat center yet. we just don't. But in the process of the seeking, God has given us something that we're pursuing. And Craig sent me a message, and he's like, hey, man, I know the fiery darts are coming at you. And I'm like, I'm listening to this message like 10 times. I'm like, bro, how do you even know this? Like, yeah, the fiery darts are coming at me. Like, they're bigger than you think. Nonstop, constantly. Things that are challenging our view of God. And just like the disciples, when they were on the boat and the storm came up, and Jesus is like taking a nap and like, hey, you might want to get up, Savior, and do, like, I am working towards being that and having that relationship with God in the seeking. So I have some wristbands that I made available for you guys in the back of the room. In the process of building Regenesis, which we're still doing, I came up with this idea to help myself stay in the seeking and to stay what we call journey focused. And so journey focused, the easiest way to describe that for me is turn-by-turn GPS. Where's it telling you to go? I don't know about y'all's GPS, but mine goes crazy sometimes. And then when my wife and I are driving somewhere together, it goes crazy, and we have arguments over it. But the point of it is that it's showing you right there the next right step. And having that mindset of living in a journey-focused mentality, not trying to take on all the things that you got going on in life, but just today. Staying focused on God, being able to take the things that we've been through and gone through and bring us back to himself has been what has helped me get through some of the crazy things that I've shared with you guys. The wristband is in the back. It says Regenesis, and it says Journey Focused on the outside. On the inside, I won't take a long time telling you that story, but it was not supposed to be the way it is in the wristband. It was supposed to be colors on there, and you could see nice silver, M77, ASK, and when I got them, I'm like, man, these things are wrong, and I put the thing on, and if you grab one, you'll feel it. Like every single day of my life, I feel Matthew 7:7. It touches me. I feel the raised letters here. That was the gift God gave me, because I hit the button wrong, I guess, when I was placing the order. But it's a beautiful thing about how God can take things that we wanted a certain way and turn them into what we need. Oh, man. I have a lot of stories that I could tell you guys, but I don't really. My goal is that you would walk away today with ask, seek, knock. That would register today, and then when the waves start crashing again, you can find your notes and go, okay, like, where do I go with this, God? Like, what are you doing? Because I'm feeling hopeless and, like, I don't see you working here. But we're hoping to know that he's here. In the last couple years of working with people, and more importantly, for me, I go back to the floor encounter of being at the behavioral center and just constantly feeling triggered, constantly feeling in fear, constantly wondering. And the verbiage that went through my head was, I don't know. I just don't know. So our next point is, I don't know is different than I don't know right now. And when I have sat down with people who are going through some of the absolute darkest things that you can imagine, and you can ground yourself on something that happened in your life where God did show up and it did work out and he did give you a story that was different than the one that you had before, and you are like, wow, that worked out differently than what I thought, but man, God really came through. That's the, I don't know right now, but I do know that eventually things will be revealed to me. And I'm going to see how God worked things out. At the end of 2019, we were planning on moving next door to my mom and dad. And so we were getting some things straight at the house that they had that we're going to move into. I'm working with my dad, doing some straightening up and stuff like that. And I had this overt sense, like every single thing we were doing, I would never be doing that again with him. And I can't tell you how hard that was. Like, I'm interacting with him and I'm looking in his eyes and I'm actively grieving. Like, I knew my dad was going to be gone. But there was a power, like you have no idea. Like, I can't even describe it. I came home, I told my wife about this. The next few weeks, we got to a critical point where things needed to be done around the house we were moving into. And so some things happened, and Craig came over, and we got Dad to the hospital. Well, by Christmas Eve, every year, our family's doing fried chicken and grits, and we're celebrating Jesus with a Jesus cake, and it's a good time. I don't remember us doing that at a hospital before, but we did that year. And I remember my dad's face, and the not knowing, and I remember thinking to myself, like, what is going on here? Like, I don't get this. I don't understand, because I was not falling apart, even though I was very emotional. So we left that day. We all had the family at the hospital cafeteria, and we did our normal, Christmas Eve dinner, and we went and got in the car. And I've left out about 247,000 hours of alcohol struggle this morning. It was brutal. I almost died. But we got in the car, and I put my hand on my wife's leg, and I said, I am so thankful for alcohol in my life. That's a crazy person comment, or either it's a God came through, and he took this crazy thing that pulled me away from him and turned it around so that even in the middle, because that day, before chicken and grits and cake and all those things, was when we got the actual word that Dad did have cancer. Being able to celebrate God's bigger than me, He's shown me so many times the ways that he's come through. So we got moved, and we were like right next door to mom and dad. And I remember I was getting ready to fly out to Chicago. My son's in the Navy. He was going to boot camp, or he was at boot camp. He was about to graduate. And so this was literally like right before everything got shut down in America from COVID. So his class was the last graduating class from the U.S. Navy before the entire country got, shut down. Mom calls me. My birthday is February 13th, just so y'all know, in case you want to send me something. Kidding. I don't ever say stuff like that. So mom calls me. She goes, "Are you sitting down?" I'm like, "No, I can." So she goes, "Your dad just got his test back, and he's cancer-free." I'm like, "What? That's crazy." You know what? It was only a reprieve because he's home now. There's a power in knowing. And the more you seek, the more powerful God's presence comes in your life. And when you know that, when the darkness is around you, I don't feel like, oh, yeah, darkness. No, like it's a hunkering down and knowing, like, God, though this life slays me, I will seek you. It'll give you a strength and a power. So I think I got like 20 minutes left, bro. The main point for me being here and sharing my story is not to give you guys a bunch of the dirt on me and all that. It's the fact that my day in and day out life right now is working on a dream that's going to give people a place to come and find hope again. Because I was given hope again. I'm sure that we'll be back again. Craig has crazy ideas about what God's doing in our lives, and I appreciate that. But there is nothing that seeking and asking God to show up in your life and holding your place, staying still and knowing. I know it's the last thing we want to do. I mean, I'm going to tell you, liquid hope for me, vodka was way easier to get into the gotta work it out mode. But I just became weaker and weaker and more lost. So before we close today, I wanted to share really just a quote in a second. Just share it. I couldn't pull it up on my screen. So for those of you who watched Friends, I used to watch Friends here and there, but Matthew Perry, he's been in quite a few movies. He ended up being found dead in his hot tub this week. Of course, the natural thing would be like, oh, he probably overdosed or he, picked up again or something. But the backdrop to the story is he's been traveling around the world for the last year or so, talking about a book that he has and telling his story and handing hope off to people. So if you don't think, I look at this and for a second stop and say, God, what are you doing? Let me read this. He said, I started to cry. I really started to cry. That shoulder shaking kind of uncontrollable weeping. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time in my life, I felt okay. I felt safe, taken care of. Decades of struggling. He doesn't mention the $20-something million that he spent on trying to get help. And wrestling with life and sadness, and all was washed away like a river of pain gone into oblivion. I had been in the presence of God, and I was certain of it. And this time I had prayed for the right thing, help. Eventually the weeping subsided, but everything was different now. And I stayed sober for 2 years based solely on that moment. God had shown me a sliver of what life could be. He'd saved me that day and for all days. So no matter what, he had turned me into a seeker, not only of sobriety and truth, but also of him. Let's pray. God, you're a big God, and we don't always experience that. Man, we don't always experience that. But the sadness and the grief and the hopelessness and the things that just don't seem like they're going to work out, I got a few stories of how they worked out. And I got a lot of how they worked out differently. And I pray that you would show us that despite what we see or feel, that you're still real and that you would meet us right where we are. And you would refill our hope tanks. Thank you.